Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video, it has been a while, has it not? Yes, despite making the pronouncement that I was going to be getting back to a more usual schedule for my uploads, I somehow managed to go almost 2 months once again, without any actual, well, videos. I did a short somewhere back, I believe, in late October, early November, and it was on this very knife, in fact. But aside from that, I have been quite absent. So, to that extent, I apologize, but I'd been distracted lately from YouTube and really hadn't been, well, all that motivated in regards to uploads. That and the fact I'd had a few failed takes on this particular review, and so that dissuaded me from uploading anything, as I might not be as perfectionistic as I once was. I certainly do not want to send out a video with poor quality. So, here's hoping that that has been remedied, and here's hoping to return, or at very least attempt to return, to a more regular upload schedule. Now, what are we discussing today? Well, first of all, this knife is another French knife. Big surprise there. Still have a few of those to get through. But this was bought at Knives of France, knivesofrance.com. Great seller, very much enjoy their selection and customer service. So, would highly recommend if you're living in North America and you're looking for a French knife that maybe deviates from the common opinel and the like. So, this knife, the Navette, is a piece that I was very interested in trying. And when I first saw this, it somewhat caught me off guard, as I wasn't used to seeing this sort of equal-end penknife being made in France. This is a type of knife that is quite universal and can be found in many different countries. An example here is an American equal-end pen. This is an older knife, but in very, very nice condition. And this is a Cutmaster from New York. Very nice little knife. This one has the clasp at the back for a lanyard. Or instead, you have this knife here, which is a vintage piece from Germany. You can see has a nice patina here. This is an Elosi from Zollingen. Another similar type of knife. And then you have perhaps the closest comparison to the Navette, and I will bring this more into focus later in the video. We have a knife from Switzerland. This is a Victorinox Excelsior. And you can already probably tell these are incredibly similar in their dimensions. Granted, the Navette is a fair bit thicker. So I'll put this off to the side for now and focus on the Navette exclusively. So this knife is, again, an equal-end pen. Some might call it an equal-end cigar, as it does somewhat resemble the shape. And this is what would be referred to as a shadow pattern, as it has no bolsters. I learned that term from Knife Thoughts, very good YouTube channel. He did a review on this knife, which was one of the videos that prompted me to get this, so please go check him out. Great channel. And the Navette really is the classic penknife, however, one from France. Like many French knives, it does have a story and a use behind it, and that is that the Navette, or as it is in English, the shuttle, was quite prominent in weaving, ribbon weaving, I believe. And so it has that sort of use in its background. Some knives are, again, rural and agricultural, and this one was used for weaving. So, very nice little origin use for this knife. But having a look at it, it takes on the classic spear point or Bourbonnais blade shape for the primary blade. And for the secondary, which is quite a bit stiffer. We have a classic pen blade. So, this knife, to start off, is very lightweight and quite sturdy, all things considered. When I first saw this, I expected it to be quite the dainty piece, and it is, being a penknife and all. But the spring on this knife is actually quite stiff. Not to the point of being uncomfortable, I would say, although you can hear there's a decent thwack when this knife opens. So, despite the size and somewhat slender profile, this knife could absolutely work as an everyday carry. Now, what originally brought me to this knife, and what really prompted me to get it, was the handle. Now, if you haven't already noticed it, and that would be quite difficult to ignore, this has what are, in my opinion, the most beautiful horn covers on a knife that I have ever seen. At very least, that I have owned. I'm sure there's better out there, but this is absolutely beautiful. The coloration and the texture in this is simply astounding. There are so many shades here. We have grays, whites, blues, blacks, greens, and even a bit of yellow. Just the coloration here is simply outstanding. And that is the beauty of natural handle materials. No two knives will look the same. They might look similar, but not at all the same. And on the other side even, you can see that is quite true, as we have a very different pattern. This one is mostly gray in the center with this very pronounced, deep, inky black outline. So the edges of the knife are jet black, with the center being this nice brownish gray. And on this side, there are quite a few more colors, very vibrant, but just beautiful as a whole. And one thing that some people are concerned about, cracking. There are only 2 instances that could even be considered cracks on this knife. First is here, the very base of this pin. Pardon me, am I? Yes, I am. I have the wrong side. Right here you can see, next to the pin, there's a very, very small crack right there. And it's actually quite difficult to see, but it is there. So in terms of cracking, there is a very, very small flaw right there, but I'm not going to see that as an issue. The crack can, of course, get bigger, which is something you do not want to happen, but I've had worse on a case knife, so I don't really see this as something to worry about too much. The only other thing, I don't believe it's a crack, it's more of, I think, a little scratch in the center here of the show side. There's a very, very small scratch right in here. I believe the camera is having a bit of trouble picking it up. Yeah, right there, I believe. So again, all things considered, these are flaws that are so small, I am struggling to show them on camera. By no means are they things that ruin the knife for me or even take away from it. So that doesn't bother me, but as with horn handles, be careful. Try not to drop them, obviously. They're going to be a lot less resilient than, say, a metal or aluminum handle here. Or actually micarta, for that matter. But anyway. Of course, this knife is fixed with brass pins, polished brass liners, a polished steel spring, a single spring, which maintains the 2 blades, which once again are very tightly packed, and despite being a little bit thicker than the Excelsior, this is still a very, very trim knife. If you want a measurement on it, you're looking at 1/4 of an inch in terms of thickness, just a little over 1/4 of an inch. So very much a thin knife. And yeah, the blades open with these nail nicks, which are quite well ground, all things considered. The snap on the main blade, I would rate an easy, maybe a 6. And then the secondary blade, which is oddly enough a bit tighter, probably about a 7. Neither blade has any form of play in any particular direction. Very, very solid. The pins are flush. Nothing catches when I move my finger across. Very well sanded and polished. The handle itself is very reflective, very glossy. It plays with the light quite nicely. And the blades are satin finished, featuring 12C27 Sandvik steel, very typical for a French knife. Opinel, Layol, Thiers, a whole bunch of different knife patterns all utilize this steel. And it's quite common among Thiers Issard's lineup, which again, if I have not mentioned, Thiers Issard is the company that made this knife. Some might know it as G.R, which is the brand that these knives come from, and I believe those are the knives of our grandfathers. And it's a series of knives made the traditional way, using old-fashioned dies from over 100 years ago. And they're meant to be accurate reproductions of the types of knives you would have seen back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, and perhaps even further back. So this is part of that series, as referenced here. It has the GR logo with Navette, France. And when you fold the blade, you can see inox for stainless, and then another GR stamped into the tang. Speaking of which, this knife is a bit odd when it comes to blade wrap. It does have a kick. However, at the very base, this end, you can see there's this little well for the blade, and part of the tip actually sits in here. And what I believe that does is, for the majority of the sharpening process at the start, you can sharpen this knife and it will drop, so the tip will not be proud. However, after a certain point, it will rest on the kick, and then you will have the possible risk of a proud tip. But I haven't sharpened this knife enough at all to really know. I've only needed to give it a very, very brief strop once, and that was a minuscule amount. Even so, I believe I just used a bit of leather for that. But I have carried this knife for probably going on 4 months now. Now, usually when I have a knife, I cycle it. I don't keep the same knife and carry it every single day. I swap them out every now and then. This is one of the only knives that has been consistently in the rotation. And for a time, I'd say June, July, and August, I was carrying this more than any other knife. And remember, I put my knives through fairly light use. I'm not beating on them every day, but this knife has managed to perform every task I really need it to. And even though those fall within the light use category, this knife has greatly impressed me. It's small, it's light, it's made using nice materials, and yet it's very, very sturdy. So I am incredibly impressed with it. The fit and finish, which is something I should touch on a bit more, is not at all perfect. So if you have the impression that this knife is flawless, then you will be disappointed. One of the things that I've noticed on this knife, and every other review that I've seen has also complained about this, is that there seems to be some pretty severe gapping, particularly near the pivot. And you can see this is a very significant gap. I can stick a nail in there. That is not good at all. And to some, that might be unacceptable. Now, I have a bit of a weird method when it comes to dealing with gapping. And I don't like gapping. I don't think anyone does. However, there is a point when I can excuse it. If it's minimal, for one, then I don't really mind. But in cases like this, where it's quite significant in two areas, mind you, it's a bit harder to excuse, but the one saving grace is the price on this knife. This knife cost around $50 US, which is incredibly inexpensive for what the knife is offering. You're getting two blades of 12C27, genuine horn handles, made in France by hand the traditional way. I cannot say that the gapping ruins this knife for me. It might bother some people, and I know there are certain flaws in knives that upset one person a lot more than another. Mine is blade play. If even the slightest bit of blade play occurs on a knife, I am going to downgrade it and give it a much lower rating than I would if it didn't. It can be perfect in almost every way, but if it has blade play, that's going to very much bother me. For another person, as long as the blade isn't easily enough to be moved to the point where you could shake it and you'll hear and see the blade play, then they're fine with it. To each his own. But for me, gapping is a nuisance, but not a deal breaker. And in this case, it's a little bit worse, but I can still forgive it. As this knife has impressed me in so many other ways, and I'm going to try putting that as eloquently as I can in a moment. But as for the overall fit and finish, I think it's quite good. Again, everything's sanded well, everything's polished nicely. One touch that this knife featured that really surprised me, and it's usually a sign of a higher end knife, is that the inner back spring was also polished. Do excuse the bits of grease and pocket lint, of course, but the interior of a back spring being polished is not something that you see very much. So having that is to me a sign of good quality. Also the interior with the brass liners, that also appears to be polished. So very nice in that regard. The knife came absolutely razor sharp. You could shave with it. It's probably a little bit duller, if I had to guess. But let's see after some light use if it can still pass the shaving test. Yes, it can. Absolutely. Okay, so it holds an edge fairly well too, at least with light use, which is something that you can expect from 12C27. It's no super steel. It doesn't hold an edge forever, but as long as you're not abusing it and you know how to strop a knife quickly enough, then this will be absolutely fine for you, especially considering the price point. So, as far as a stainless steel goes, I quite like it. In the meantime, the knife as a whole, I think is excellent. It's comfortable in the hand. It's very, very smooth. It's light, but not to the point where it feels like there's nothing to hold on to. You can still get a nice grip on it. 4 fingers with a bit of a choke at the tang, so very comfortable in hand during use. the dimensions on this knife, you're looking at an overall length of 5 3/4 with the main blade, and with the secondary blade, it's coming in at just a hair under 5 inches. Oh, well. The overall secondary blade length is just over 1.5, and the secondary cutting edge is just under 1.5. And then the main blade is coming in just under 2.5 overall blade length, with the cutting edge being 2 1/4. So this should very much be a UK legal knife. And then, of course, what it'll be like in the pocket, it's 3 1/4 inches closed. So very pocket friendly, very, very unintrusive. This could slip easily into a jacket pocket or a suit, and you wouldn't notice it until you need it. It also comes with this synthetic faux leather felt-lined pouch, which makes for a very nice little method of carry. Another thing, oh, don't want to do that. Another thing shared with the Excelsior here is that it also comes with this similar faux leather pouch, and the knife can just slip into that. And both of these are immensely easy to carry, as they're already very small, and then with the pouch, you can toss them in a pocket and just sort of forget about them. But in the meantime, one other concern you might have for the fit and finish is blade rub, as knives operating on a single spring that feature 2 blades can sometimes have the problem of scraping. And there is some very minimal blade rub on this knife. On the main blade, you can see there is a little bit on this side. Don't know how well the camera wants to pick that up. Clearly not all that much. There you are. Right up here. There's a little bit of scratching, but nothing too serious. And again, the satin finish does a decent enough job of concealing that, so you're not going to notice it as much in certain lights. But the main blade also features a little bit at the very front. But again, very much it's minimal. You do have to use the nail nick to open these. You cannot pinch these in any way. So that's something that might upset a few people, but I, for one, can live with it. The secondary blade's nail nick is a little bit hard to reach, so that can be a bit irritating, but as far as blade rub goes on that blade, it seems to only have a very, very minimal amount at the very front. So not too bad in that regard. Again, everything closes up nicely, just sits very snug in the frame. But overall, this knife is beautiful, and the handles still elevate it far beyond, I think, what the price range demands. At this price, I would expect horn that looks a bit more like this piece of buffalo horn on a Taylor's Eyewitness Barlow, which ironically is a far more expensive knife than this. Now, I suppose the plain look could be appealing to some, but looking at these two patterns side by side, I don't think there's any competition as to which is the nicer piece. Or rather, pieces, as really this one looks completely removed from this one. But all in all, I am immensely impressed with this knife, and it's really helped me appreciate the beauty of horn as a handle material. I know in the last couple videos I've done on French knives, I've discussed the benefits of horn as a handle, and how it really is underappreciated to me, and perhaps to others. It's a lot more uncommon in American knives and German knives, but in France and Italy, they really appreciate how useful of a material it is and how nice it can look. So I, for one, went from disliking the material to now very much enjoying it, and the Navette has only furthered that. I still stand by the fact that this is the nicest set of horn handles that I think I own, and some might not like the fact that they aren't perfectly mirrored. I know some people like having two handles that look like they're part of a set, but I personally enjoy the change from the two. Perhaps you can call it uneven and inconsistent, but I think it gives the knife a world of character and just looks stunning. But I've rambled on enough. All in all, this knife is excellent, and if you, like me, enjoy the Victorinox Excelsior, this is perhaps the best French knife for you, and I would recommend it any day. They're so similar, both featuring spear point main blades, stainless steel, with the sharpening choil. They both lack bolsters, but feature plain handles. I still think that the Navette is the far prettier of the two, but that's personal opinion. But regardless, these are just... you can't go wrong with either knife. And I think if you have the Excelsior and you want to try a French knife, then by all means the Navette is an excellent first choice. It's a bit different from the usual Opinel, but it's still similar enough to something you might have already owned that it won't be too outlandish. But just overall, I adore this knife. And I always loved the Excelsior, so I knew I'd enjoy this, but it surpassed my expectations more than I can describe. And the fact that I've carried it so much really speaks to that volume. The fit and finish isn't perfect by any means, but for $50, it's got a strong spring, good steel. It came hair-popping sharp. It's made by a traditional company using traditional methods. The handles are absolutely gorgeous. The value on this knife, I think, is very much there. That might be my personal bias speaking. I might just like this knife because I like penknives. I appreciate carrying a smaller knife, a lighter knife, and one that's more thin and fits in a pocket better. But even if I am speaking from that point of bias, I still think that there are some definitely realized benefits that this knife has that I don't see a whole lot. And penknives have fallen out of favor to most people, considering the fact that their original purpose of sharpening quills isn't necessary, really, in our modern world. But the concept of a small, multi-bladed, equal-end knife, usually without bolsters, although some penknives do have bolsters. I do not have an example with me here, but they are light, they're thin, and they're not threatening. That's one of the best things. This is not something that will be viewed as a weapon. This is going to be a tool, and a very stylish and handsome one at that. So, if you work in an office, if you want a knife that could fit into a purse or a pocket, a bag, a suit, anything like that, something that is unintrusive, light, thin, and just won't be noticeable until you need it, this is a great place to start. And if you want to get interested in French cutlery, I can't think of a better gateway, really. If you've already tried an Opinel, then this is really the next thing I'd recommend. Again, if you have problems with gapping or don't like having to walk your blades down for fear of blade wrap, well, then perhaps this knife isn't for you. But if you can take the time to be careful with your knife and don't mind the gapping, then this is an astounding piece. I absolutely love it. This is, to me, an easy 9 out of 10. I can't give it 10 out of 10 because then it wouldn't have the gapping. But in terms of the condition that the horn's coming in, how, despite being constantly warned of cracking, this knife really has the most minimal cracks imaginable, and just the general utility that it offers, while remaining as beautiful as it is. I am very much taken with this knife, and so it will absolutely be going with the rest of my pen knives, both vintage and new. And if the Canada Post strike ever ends, then I might just have another similar penknife to showcase fairly soon. So here's hoping that that can happen, and I can record that video and get it uploaded soon enough that I can maybe start a habit again, because I fell out of doing videos for so long that really it's just a matter of restarting the habit. And at that point, well, perhaps I've got myself a schedule again. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I am just very taken with this knife. I've rambled on for 30 minutes about it. I apologize for that. If you've managed to stick to the end of this, thank you very much. I appreciate the time and the support. Again, that goes to all my viewers. If you've watched my videos for any amount of time, then you've dealt with my ramblings for quite a while now, and to that I say the most sincere thank you I can. But yes, excellent knife, the Navette or Shuttle by Thiers Issard or G.R. Beautiful, beautiful piece. You can find it at knivesofrance.com. Great website. I would highly recommend them. And yeah, if you're looking for a classic penknife but want to try a French knife, well, this is the place to start. And if you're at all interested in another metal handle, similar to the Excelsior here in the Alox, then perhaps consider looking into some of the brass variations of this knife, which are available from the Coutellerie Corsol, also at Knives of France, of course. But all in all, beautiful knife, equal end pen, shadow pattern, or cigar. Just generally an all-around excellent little knife. Not perfect, but as I tend to say, neither are we. So why should our knives be any different? Thank you very much for watching. This has been the Thiers Issard Navette, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.